Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for July 27th, 2022. The question I'm going to take up today is a question that was posed quite a while ago by Lyndon LaRouche, which is, do the Western countries possess the moral fitness to survive? We can take a look across the broad panorama of government and government actions, and what we see is increasingly bad policies, bad decisions, whether intentional or not, are worsening the conditions of life for the population of the entire world. Clearly, government officials and leading think tanks and media types don't possess the moral or intellectual fitness to survive. We see it with sanctions, the so-called Boomerang Effect. Instead of bringing down Russia, it's bringing down the standards of living in the populations in the countries imposing the sanctions, while at the same time, on the moral question, it's threatening the lives of billions of people, including in countries such as Afghanistan, Yemen, the East African countries, where the populations are living on the edge to start with, and governments in the West are refusing to take actions to aid those countries, while at the same time imposing sanctions which worsen the hardships. Now and at the same time they're doing that, there's a boomerang effect. We see it in terms of Europe in particular, but also in the United States. You can blame Putin all you want, but it's the policy decisions made by Western governments which are threatening the lives of people around the world. Now, this was commented on by Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry, who made an interesting comment on this. She said, quote, "The isolation of Russia announced by the West has turned into the West's self-isolation from the rest of the world. They are only placing themselves in an increasingly stupid position and pushing themselves deeper into a dead end," unquote. Not exactly diplomatic language, but a brutal truth is expressed in that. Governments in the West are collapsing, as she pointed out. In the case of Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom, Draghi in Italy, we see the clear weakness of Macron in France, of Scholz in Germany, certainly of Biden in the United States. So there's hardly diplomatic language from Zakharova, but it's a truthful assessment. But there are few major voices in the West which are speaking out and either acknowledging this or reporting on the developments that she's referring to as a pattern. Let me give you two examples. The European Union green policy. It's not Putin who's created an energy crisis in Europe. It's the green policy, the policy of shutting down nuclear, shutting down coal, of putting sanctions on Russian oil and gas. The European Union adopted a voluntary reduction of gas consumption by 15%. Voluntary, is that going to happen? Well, even if it does, there will be extreme shortages because Germany, for example, is going to close its remaining 3 nuclear plants by the end of the year. Now, if Russia does decide to embargo oil and gas from Europe, then this will further exacerbate the crisis. And the Russians may do that. But what this is doing, this so-called voluntary reduction, will force cuts in personal use, home heating, for example, gas for transportation, and especially industrial use, which may lead to, for example, in Germany, 1.5 million jobs lost in the most productive sector of the economy, the auto sector, the machine tool sector, and so on. And that will also increase costs at a time of runaway inflation. So that's one example of what Zakharova correctly refers to as stupid policies, self-inflicted wounds. Now then we had the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee meeting yesterday. If there's someone to point to, forget Putin, point to the Federal Reserve and its policy of quantitative easing as a cause for inflation. On July 27th, they announced another increase in the federal funds rate, taking it up by 0.75 of a point to a range of 2.25 to 2.5. And Jerome Powell said more rate hikes are coming. The question is, how high will they go? Powell said the Federal Open Market Committee is addressing the question as to whether it is seeing, quote, the slowdown in economic activity that we think we need, unquote, to reach price stability. Why do you have to shut down the economy to have price stability? That's the question that should have been asked to him. The press should have also asked him, why is it that there's inflation in the first place? Because it was occurring before anything happened in Ukraine. In 2021, during the course of the year, U.S. inflation went up 7%. That was before a single Russian soldier crossed into Ukraine. So how is that Putin's fault? The question that should be posed is, did the printing of more than $5 trillion in the last 18 months and support for the Treasury to borrow $5 trillion more, did that have anything to do with the rate of inflation? The answer is obviously yes, but not a single reporter asked that, and Powell didn't volunteer that. Now, he said, look, we have some good signs. Durable goods production made a big gain in June. Why is that? Military production. The typical case of assuming that producing so-called durable goods for transportation, for weapons development, and so on, is a good thing for the economy. Anyone who remembers Vietnam, where the debate was guns or butter, but not both, should realize that this is a large part of the inflationary impact that's coming online. Now, economists are cited in the media saying that more pain is needed to stop inflation. Bloomberg News, for example, cited, quote, a growing number of analysts who say it will take a recession, that is, force a recession with much higher numbers of unemployment in order to do something to ease price pressures. CNBC reported yesterday that there's a growing increase, a rate of increase in consumer debt as people are forced to rely on credit cards to pay for food, transportation, and medical costs. And of course, with the interest rates going up in the federal funds rate, those will be passed on to credit cards, which range from 18% to 29%. Hardly an anti-inflationary policy. So with the Western economy tanking under the effects of a systemic collapse caused by failed economic policies and economic axioms, there's actually an increase in trade going on among the Eurasian countries, with China and Russia in particular, but also India, the Belt and Road Initiative, and other such projects that are day by day new projects being announced that are moving toward an improvement of those economies, even as the Western establishment is driving the Western economy into the ground, causing more pain, supposedly, to address the problem. Now, this is where the LaRouche proposals are gaining in support and in discussion internationally. The idea of debt cancellation for the poorest countries. Why starve people to cover uncollectible debt, which is what happens when you have debt defaults? Nations can no longer purchase food, no longer purchase fuel. The economies grind to a halt and people die, so that Western banks can grab whatever liquidity they can to stay afloat, protecting their bloated balance sheets that are bloated with uncollectible debt. So cancel some of that. Do a bankruptcy reorganization and move toward a new Bretton Woods system, which corrects the errors of the old Bretton Woods system, but enables a stable trading capability based on currency that's backed by something physical. Physical production. That's the expertise that LaRouche introduced into the debate. The idea of the American system of physical economy, that you use credit for physical goods production, for research and development, for infrastructure, for new plant and equipment. That doesn't cause inflation. That produces necessary wealth that can then be monetized to increase wealth further by new innovations in technology. So our initiatives are gaining internationally. There's more and more discussion. And I'd urge you to become part of that. Become part of the LaRouche movement, to take these ideas to deal with the stupid thinking that characterizes much of the Western dialogue and the immoral policies of the financial establishment, who are concerned with their balance sheets and not concerned at all with you or your children or your grandchildren's future. So thanks for joining me today. I'm glad to be back with you, and I'll be back tomorrow for another update.